speaker today. Alberto is a postdoctoral fellow at the Population Studies Center, and he works with the Malawi Longitudinal Studies of Families and Health. And basically, since he started his position as postdoctoral fellow, he spent most of his time in Malawi doing fieldwork. This year, 2017, MLSFH fieldwork, where he did an incredible job. Really incredible job. And he was very instrumental for the implementation of the intervention that we did this year as part of the Malawi Longitudinal Studies, Families and Health. And Alberto is not new to Penn, so he received his PhD here in the Department of Economics, where he worked with Petro Todd, Holger Zieg, and I forgot.
Camilo Garcia.
Camilo Garcia. So he's presenting today on the impact of immigration policies and local enforcement, crime and policing efficiencies, and this is part of his dissertation research. So welcome, Alberto.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction. So today I'm going to talk about my work on immigration enforcement that I did during my PhD in economics here at Penn. And hopefully at the end of the talk, I'm going to talk about how about my ongoing work to extend this project. Okay? So let's start by looking at the effects of, looking at the changes in immigration enforcement in the US in the last few years. So in this graph, I show the number of deportations from the interior of the United States over time. Okay, so you see that the number of deportation drastically increased during the Bush administration in a period where undocumented immigrants population grew from around 9 million to 11 million. Okay, so the deportation disproportionately increased compared to the immigrant population and undocumented population in particular. And they reach a peak in the first years of the Obama administration, at the time where like President Obama was even called deporter-in-chief by someone at the time. And then deportation drastically decreased in the second term of the Obama administration. And they reached levels comparable to the first years of the Bush administration. And now it's likely that we're going to see another change in this graph, that in the next year it's possible deportation increase again, since President Trump has been quite clear in wanting to change course in immigration policy, wanting to increase deportations. And President Trump has also been quite clear in linking the issue of immigration with the issue of crime. And in fact, my general research question is, what is the impact of immigration enforcement on crime? Now, you may think that immigration enforcement may reduce crime because deportation may act as a deterrent. So the punishment for committing even a small crime is that you are sent to your home country. Also, if immigrants commit crimes, then simply reducing the immigrant population will also reduce crime. At the same time, it's possible that immigration enforcement may be counterproductive and even increase crime, because it may have a negative impact on the ability of the police in arresting criminals. And I have two channels in mind. One is that focusing on immigration violation may distract police resources from fighting serious crimes. And second, it's possible that immigration enforcement may reduce collaboration of immigrants with the police. So, for example, imagine you are undocumented and you witness a crime, then you will think twice before reporting that crime to the police. Okay, so I'm not only going to study the effect of immigration enforcement on crime, but also I'm interested in the effect of immigration enforcement on this policing efficiency in arresting criminals. Now, I'm interested in understanding the effect of immigration enforcement on outcomes. So since this is a quantitative project, I needed some measures of immigration enforcement. And to talk about how I construct this measure of immigration enforcement, I need to talk a little bit about the deportation process in the United States. Okay? So usually, the first step of the deportation process in the United States is the arrest of a non-citizen by a local police officer. So naturally, undocumented immigrants can be deported, but also legal non-citizens can be deported if they commit a serious crime. Most of the deportation starts with an arrest that actually is not a serious violation of the law. Okay? It could be, most of the cases, actually just a traffic violation or something minor. The second step of the deportation process is what is called a detainer request, which is a request of the Federal Immigration Agency, which is called ICE, to the local jail to start deportation proceedings. Okay, so it's a request of ICE to the jail. Please, we want to pick your undocumented immigrants from the local jail. Third step of the deportation process is actually entering into federal custody, which is not a trivial step because it depends on the collaboration of the sheriff in handing over immigrants to ICE. And often the sheriff will refuses to hand over the immigrant to ICE. Finally, the last step is actually once the immigrant is in ICE custody, can be finally removed. So this is the standard procedure, but there can be some other possibilities. For example, it can be an ICE raid. It means that ICE goes on the street, goes in the workplace, goes to the home of the undocumented, pick the undocumented, and put in federal custody. Around 20% of the deportation from the interior of the country come through an ICE raid. Also, it's possible that sometimes, like, immigrants get handed over to ICE from the local jail without an official federal request, without an official detainer request. Yeah?
For what reason a sheriff might not want to hand over someone?
I'm gonna go over this very soon. The reason is that let me get there, and then we will. If you have again this question, I will come back to that. Yeah.
Do you have voluntary departures in this process after an arrest, so without the actual physical removal, but the person decides to leave? The options. How would that enter? The outcome would be the same, but it wouldn't be an actual removal. Person voluntarily.
Right. I would consider it's kind of a sort of removal in this sense. Like here, I'm just trying to very simplify the deportation process, I guess. But as you're gonna see, I'm mostly focused on these steps from the local arrest to ICE custody. So the voluntary return is not the focus of this project. Now, just for you to notice that, so local authorities are mostly involved in the step from going from detainer to ICE custody, right? That is where the local government, local police has a choice, whether to collaborate in handing over immigrants to ICE. While all the other steps, like the detainer, issue of detainer, the ICE raid, the final decision on removal are federal decisions. Now, what did I do? I collected data with multiple Freedom of Information Act requests to the Department of Homeland Security, where I was able to get data on several steps of this deportation process. In particular, data on local arrest of non-citizens, data on detainers, and data on the number of people, number of local arrests of non-citizens that end up in ICE custody. Okay? So this data in particular refer to a program which is called Secure Communities, which introduce a process by which the fingerprints of every arrestee are not only sent to the FBI, but they are also sent to ICE, which can immediately check whether an immigrant is deportable or not. This program was introduced in the first county in October 2008, and was implemented in all the counties by the end of 2012, and I have data up to September 2014. Okay, so I have an unbalanced panel of all the counties in the United States. Now, with this data, I can construct some measure of immigration enforcement. In particular, I can construct a measure of what I call federal immigration enforcement as the number of detainers over the number of local arrests of non-citizens. And I can construct a measure of local immigration enforcement as the number of people that are in ICE custody over the number of detainers, which are these federal requests to the local jail. This is not a super precise measure of local immigration enforcement, also because there is this possible channel. So I'm not sure that all the immigrants that are sent to ICE pass through a detainer. Well, hopefully that channel is small, and in my current work I'm got more data in a way to identify more precisely just this channel. Yeah?
What's your coverage of the data?
Coverage?
Yes.
So it's a monthly data, county level monthly. So all the counties of the United States for all the months from October 2008 to September 2014.
So every case will be included in your data?
Every case related to secure communities will be, yes, correct. So this measure of local immigration enforcement speaks to this collaboration of the sheriff in handing over immigrants to ICE. And then we can also think about a measure of what I call total immigration enforcement, which is basically the share of local arrests of non-citizens that end up in ICE custody, which is a mix of local and federal immigration enforcement. Yes?
So this is really interesting so far. Yeah. I don't want to get you off track, but some of what you're calling federal enforcement could potentially also be local variation in the kinds of arrests that are made. So some places put a lot of energy into traffic stops, whereas others only arrest you if you actually shoot somebody. So I don't know, maybe this is something for future work, or I don't know if you try to deal with that here, but you could also potentially look at the number of local arrests that are for traffic violations as opposed to other.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so here I'm trying to focus on what happens after the local arrest, while the local arrest per se is a measure of potential local immigration enforcement. The only problem is that it's way more tricky than what happens later, because exactly, like I should have very precise data on the crime, on the level of crime, while ICE gives just gives two levels of crime. So it tells you, oh, these are serious crime and non-serious crimes. The truth, I don't believe what they did there, because these are, I think it's honest data, this number of detainers, while their separation in serious crimes and non-serious crime is, I don't trust it that much. So I'm gonna replicate some of my analysis only for non-serious crimes, so that I can, with their definition of non-serious crimes, so that I should be more comparable. At least we shouldn't have in those homicides and traffic violation. Hopefully they made it in a way that is relatively comparable. So I can do a little bit on that. And of course also in my future work I'm thinking about this. So these are the measures. So I have measure of immigration enforcement. So I have complemented this data with data from the Uniform Crime Report on reported crime and arrest. And I construct my measure of police efficiency as arrest over crime reported. So basically the share of crimes reported that end up in an arrest, which in the criminology literature is known as clearance rate. Okay, so I have my measure of immigration enforcement, a measure of crime, a measure of policing efficiency. Now, to study the effect of a change in immigration enforcement on crime and policing efficiency, I'm particularly going to look at a federal policy change that occurred in June 2011, where the Obama administration issued some guidelines to the federal officers, to ICE officers, to prioritize deportations on serious criminals. Okay, so basically, every undocumented can still be deported, even if they commit no serious crimes, even after June 2011. But more resources should be focused on serious criminals. And this had very big consequences on the number of deportation. If you remember the first graph, the number of deportation in just 4 years drastically decreased of around 70%. So this policy had huge consequences on immigration policy. And key for my empirical strategy, and now I come to what you asked me before, the implementation of the policy has been heterogeneous in the following sense. Federal ICE officers were still deporting undocumented immigrants that committed no serious crimes, even after June 2011. And so some counties, some local governments decided to, in a way, fully comply with these Obama guidelines, took a step further, and decided to stop collaborating with ICE unless for serious crimes. So what it means is that, for example, in San Francisco, what happens is that if an undocumented immigrant commits a homicide, eventually he will be handed over to ICE and will be deported. But if he commits just a traffic violation, he will not be sent to ICE. These counties include the so-called sanctuary cities that are famous for being lenient with in immigration policy, and they also tend to vote for the Democratic Party. Finally, there was also some state reaction. The California implemented in January 2014 the California Trust Act, which basically forced all the counties that were still collaborating with ICE to stop collaborating with ICE unless for serious crimes. Now, and here I go to the motivations.
Can I ask you a really quick question? Just to understand your variables here.
Yeah.
So when they stop collaborating, is it that they stop running the fingerprints through the ICE database?
No.
Or that they just refuse to turn over the detainer?
Exactly.
So they'll end up in your federal enforcement numerator, but not in your local enforcement numerator?
They're gonna go on exactly local enforcement. So what I'm talking about, what they are doing.
For a broken tail, like if you get driving without a license, you get arrested locally, and that you get fingerprinted and you end up as a 1 in the detainer? You get a local arrest, so that's you are in the database, you are in my database. Then the federals, they tries to deport you, so they issue a detainer request, and the sheriff says, no, so I'm not gonna give you, and this individual will not show up in ICE custody. Okay,
in my
so
data.
110.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
So that's what I'm talking about. This local collaboration is a measure of local immigration enforcement. So, and here are the motivation that counties gave to stop collaborating with ICE. So here is an extract of an ordinance of Cook County, basically Chicago, that give two main reasons to stop collaborating with ICE. First, they say it costs $43,000 per day to hold individuals believed to be undocumented, and we don't want to spend more money on people that are entitled to their freedom. So there is a cost component and also an ideology component, of course. And the second reason they gave is that collaborating with ICE erodes the public trust that the police needs to to secure the accurate reporting of criminal activity and to prevent and solve crimes. And if you remember, these are exactly the two channels I explained at the beginning. So immigration enforcement may endanger police efficiency because it drains resources and because it reduces the public trust they need to conduct their police activity. So here in blue I show the counties that passed such an ordinance from the time of the policy change to September 2014. And I find that, not surprisingly, I find that passing one of these ordinances has a positive, is positively correlated with the democratic share of voters as measured of percentage of voters for Obama in the 2008 and 2012 presidential election, even controlling for several county characteristics. So you see that there is, of course, a certain concentration in certain states, in California, in the West, way less in Texas, but you see that there is also within state variation. It's just not a state matter. These ordinances were not just a piece of paper, at least in some cases. Here I just show you one example of Santa Clara County in California. And I show, on this graph, I show my measure of local immigration enforcement. This collaboration of sheriff in handing over immigrants to ICE, which is, I measure as number of individuals in ICE custody over the number of detainers. You see that, so the red line is the ordinance, which is, was passed in September 2011. And you see that this measure of local immigration enforcement drastically decreased right after the ordinance. So my measure of local immigration enforcement is telling something. It doesn't go to zero, of course, because they are still collaborating with ICE for serious crimes. So it will not go to zero, but drastically decrease. And here I can try to show what are the patterns over time of my measure of immigration enforcement. It's a bit tricky because I have an unbalanced panel, so I have to make a choice. So here I chose just all the counties enrolled in secure communities before 2010, so that I can have an average that is comparable over time. And you see, so these are the red line is the Obama guidelines. And you see that all these measures decrease after the policy change. So federal enforcement, of course, because the number of detainers goes down. Is a decline in federal immigration enforcement, but also locals reacts. Local immigration enforcement goes down. It particularly goes down also after 2014 because of the California Trust Act. And total immigration enforcement, of course, is the product of the two, so it goes down as well. Okay, now, my goal is to analyze the impact of this federal policy change on crime and policing efficiency. My empirical strategy consists of two steps. First, I want to see whether indeed local enforcement went down more in Democratic counties than in Republican counties after the policy change, with a standard difference in different strategy. Then if this is true, I can justify my second step of the empirical strategy, where to identify the effect of the policy on crime and clearance rates, which is my measure of policing efficiency, I use a triple difference approach, which exploits county variation in democratic share of voters and non-citizen share of the population. So I use democratic share of voters with the idea that if the first step is true, that enforcement went down more in democratic counties, then the policy should have stronger effects on crime and clearance rates in democratic counties. And then I use the non-citizen share of the population with the idea that a policy on immigration may have an impact on crime in Los Angeles, Miami, where there are a lot of immigrants, but it cannot have an impact in Montana. It's like a federal policy on immigration cannot have an impact on crime, on a general outcome of a county where there are no immigrants. So here I can try to represent my triple difference strategy. Okay, so what I'm doing is comparing outcomes before and after the policy change between counties that have high non-citizen share and low non-citizen share. So in practice, I'm using the non-citizen share of the population, so which is I don't have two groups, I have a continuous measure, but it helps to think about a treatment group and a control group, right? Where my treatment group is counties with high non-citizen share. But this is not the end of the story, because if the first step is true, then enforcement went down more in democratic counties, which means that my real treatment group is county with high non-citizen share in more democratic counties. So what I'm doing is, conceptually, is comparing the difference in the change in outcomes between democratic and republican counties among counties with high non-citizen share versus the difference between democratic and republican counties in low non-citizen share counties. And with this strategy, I'm going to be able to understand the effects of the policy on crime and policy efficiency, and be able to contribute to the literature, for example, on immigration and crime, that so far has found that immigration had either no or small impacts on crime. The literature on the effects of immigration enforcement, and here I can cite only a few papers, but there are many more, literature has looked at the effects of immigration enforcement on immigrant population, healthcare access, labor market outcomes. Nobody has really looked at policing efficiency, for example. Yeah?
Going back to your previous slide, I'm wondering, at what time do you measure the share of non-citizens?
Mm-hmm. So I used the 2010 census, okay, so which is like just a year before the policy change. It's just before, so it's not affected by the policy change. And then I like to link my work also to the political economy of law enforcement, which stress the importance of local enforcement in determining the success of federal policy, like, for example, in the case of the Voting Rights Act or in the case of prohibition. Okay, so first step of my empirical strategy is related to enforcement. Okay, so I want to see whether enforcement went down more in democratic counties than in republican counties after the policy change. So here is a difference in difference specification, where as a dependent variable, I have my measure of immigration enforcement in county C in period T. And my period I use quarters mostly because if I use month data, since our ratio, many times the denominator is 0, so I decided to use quarter instead of months. So I have a little more observations. Then I have county fixed effects to control for unobserved time invariant characteristics of the county. I use time fixed effect to control for common shocks. And then my main variable of interest is an interaction between a variable that I call guidelines, which is the policy change. So it's a damage that is equal to 1 for periods after the policy change. And democratic share of voters that I measure as basically the share of votes for President Obama in 2008 presidential election, which is the election that precedes right before my policy change. And I chose this one also because it's comparable among counties. It's an election that's comparable among counties. And then I have, of course, some county-specific time variant controls, and which I construct by basically interacting county characteristics with time dummies. Okay, so in particular, I have ICE district and state, because what I really want to do is to compare a California county with another California county. States were also very involved in this period in immigration policy, so I kind of want to eliminate that. I want to go at the local level. And then I have some characteristics that I take from the census 2010, so non-citizen share of the population, the share of people with a bachelor's degree, share of people employed in the service sector, whether the county is rural or not. In some specification, is also the unemployment rate. Now, what we expect is that this coefficient, this beta, to be negative if enforcement went down more in democratic counties than in Republican counties. And here are the results. So here I just show the coefficient for the interaction for the main variable of interest. And the first two columns refer to local immigration enforcement. This collaboration of immigrants, collaboration of the sheriff with the police, with collaboration of the sheriff with ICE. And the coefficient is negative and statistically significant, even when I add extra county controls. Which means that local enforcement went down more in democratic counties than in Republican counties, as I was expecting. I also look at federal immigration enforcement. I didn't have a specific hypothesis on federal immigration enforcement, but it would have been interesting to see whether somehow ICE reacts to the local changes in enforcement. But I don't find any significant effect of the federal on differential effect of the policy on Democratic and Republican counties on the number of detainers. And the total immigration enforcement, the negative coefficient basically reflects the local immigration enforcement. And it's negative, although it loses some significance when it gets to when we had several controls. Now, so the results is local enforcement goes down more in democratic counties. I do some robustness checks. For example, I check for the influence of outliers. One that I want to talk about is the selection issue, because if you remember, secure communities, there was a gradual implementation of secure communities in all the counties. So it's possible that all the Republican counties were enrolled at the beginning, and then all the Democratic counties. And that would cause some problems to my strategy. So at least I can check that the Democratic share is not a predictor of the month of activation in the program once I control for certain characteristics. Okay. Now, if you believe these results, that local enforcement went down more in democratic counties, then we can move to the second step, the main part of the empirical strategy, which is this triple difference specification, where I look at the effects on the dependent variable. I look at different measures. In particular, I look at crime rates, and clearance rates, which is my measure of policing efficiency. And on the right-hand side is like a similar specification with counting time fixed effects. But now I have an interaction with the non-citizen share of the population. And more importantly, I have this triple interaction, which is between the policy change, the non-citizen share of the population, and the democratic share of voters. And this is the coefficient I really care. This is the coefficient will tell me what is the impact of the policy on my outcomes. For these results to be identified, for this empirical strategy to be, for the coefficient to be identified, I had to verify that the treatment and control groups have parallel trends before the policy change that I verify with an event study. And then I also have to look at, I need to worry about contemporaneous events to the policy change that differentially affect democratic treatment and control group. And whether these other events may affect my results. So for example, I look at economic shocks that may have particularly affected democratic countries with more immigrants, or other changes in immigration enforcement that were occurring at the same time. So I'm going to look at, for example, expiration of the 287G program, who is familiar with. I'm looking at, I have the numbers of firms enrolled in E-Verify, which is another immigration enforcement program. So I look for other changes in immigration enforcement. And also, I was one important control is the federal funds to democratic countries with large immigrant communities. Because it's possible at the same time, the Obama administration were giving more money to those countries, and that could explain the results on policing efficiency, for example. So these are some of the events that I thought about that could affect the results. The results that are here, so in the coefficient I show the coefficient for the three variables with interaction, and I really care about the triple interaction. First, I look at the effects on violent property crimes, and I see it's positive, but I see no significant effect on violent property crimes. While I find a positive and statistically significant effect on the clearance rate for violent crimes. Which means that the policy, so basically in democratic countries, a higher non-citizen share is associated with a larger increase in clearance rates relative to Republican counties. So in other words, the policy had a positive impact on clearance rate for violent crimes, if you believe my empirical strategy. And while on the clearance rate for property crimes, I don't see, it's still positive, although it's not significant. One could think of a different possible interpretation for this. Maybe immigrants relative to natives are a little bit more, relatively more victims of violent crimes than property crimes. So that's why it's more significant. But that's one possible explanation. Now, if we want to translate this coefficient in some meaningful number, we could say that for a 1 standard deviation increase in non-citizen share, moving a county from the lowest to the highest democratic share increases clearance rate of around 3.5%, where the average clearance rate for violent crimes is 57%, which would be then a meaningful, significant effect. Now, let's think about some sources of bias in this strategy. One is migration. Okay, now imagine I'm a country that reduces immigration enforcement. Then maybe criminal immigrants from countries that have high immigration enforcement move to my county, right? There could be a migration response to a change in immigration enforcement. But then, in this case, you can feel that my estimates are an upper bound of the effects on crime. So if the criminal immigrants come to the county that reduce immigration enforcement, then crime should increase even more in the democratic counties. So I can definitely rule out that the policy increase crime. I cannot definitely rule out that immigration enforcement reduce crime. And a similar argument holds for the problem of reported crime. So I don't observe actual crime, but I observe reported crime. If a county reduces immigration enforcement, then immigrants may react by reporting more crimes. But then I should see an increase in reported crimes, which I don't observe. So it's possible that actual crime went down, but since I observe only reported crimes, I don't see a significant effect. Now, in terms of mechanism, what can explain this effect on police efficiency? The two hypotheses I have is, one is the collaboration of immigrants with the police, and the other one is the resources story. Okay? On the collaboration, I'm working right now. And one idea that I had is to look at 911 data. Okay, so we're collecting now data on 911 calls in the United States, which together with data on reported crime may tell us something about this level of trust of the immigrant community to the police. And on the resources story, I started to do some analysis, and my preliminary results find that using the same empirical strategy, the same triple difference strategy, but looking at county expenditures, I find that I find some evidence that the policy increased police expenditure, while I find that the policy decreased judicial expenditure, which would make sense because counties had to pay a lot of money in lawsuits for detaining immigrants that were committed no crime. So one of the reasons why they actually decided to stop collaborating with ICE was because it cost them a lot of money in lawsuits. But more is to be done on this, and is what I'm working on. Of course, I perform other robustness checks for my main results. I control for outliers, functional forms, and so on. And of course, I look at what I was saying about other changes in immigration enforcement, economic shocks, and federal transfer to counties. But what I want to talk about a little bit more is the California Trust Act. The California Trust Act is basically was this policy implemented in California that forced all counties to stop collaborating with ICE. Okay, so was another exogenous from the point of view of the counties reduction in immigration enforcement. Then you would expect that a policy like this one will have similar effects to the Obama guidelines. And indeed, I find some reassuring evidence that the Trust Act had similar effects to the Obama guidelines. With the following strategy. I do a similar triple difference approach where I compare counties with high non-citizen share and low non-citizen share in California versus counties with high non-citizen share and low non-citizen share in the rest of the United States. And I find that clearance rate for violent crimes particularly increase in California counties with high immigrant communities. Which is, and I don't find any effect on crimes, which is reassuring. It's kind of sort of external validity, if you want, of my exercise. Now, let me conclude. So what I did in this project is to use a policy change to study the effect of changes in federal immigration enforcement on local immigration enforcement, crime, and policing efficiency. And I have three results. Okay? So first result is that local enforcement went down more in Democratic counties after the policy change, which is a result in itself because it tells us that partisanship is an important determinant of local immigration enforcement, and also reminds us that the importance of local and federal preferences being aligned in determining the success of federal policies. Second result is that the policy increased clearance rates for violent crimes, particularly in countries with high non-citizen share in more democratic countries, which I interpret of the policy have a positive effect on policy efficiency, either because it improved collaboration of immigrants with the police or because it freed resources to fight serious crimes. And my third result is that the policy did not increase crime. I cannot say 100% that policy did not decrease crime, but I can say I'm kind of confident that I can say that the policy did not increase crime. And possibly because this lower deterrent effect of low immigration enforcement was counterbalanced maybe by higher policing efficiency, which in the future, if we have more years to observe, we may see actually a reduction of crime. Then let me finally conclude talking about what I'm working right now with Professor Camilo Garcia Jimeno in the economics department. We really want to get to the mechanism and understand the relationship between immigration enforcement, crime, and social trust. So we are doing more data collection. Some are already done. First, we're getting a more complete picture of immigration enforcement. So I'm getting data on, and I already have data on all the detainers from 2002 onwards, not only secure communities. The number of detainers that end up in ICE custody, so precisely what we want, so which is basically the share of detainers that end up in ICE custody. And also district level data on ICE rates. So it's not county, it's this federal district level data. Then I have data, then we are trying to make this big effort in collecting county level 911 calls data that together with reported crimes should tell us something about this social trust. And finally, I also collected data on local political variables, in particular all the ordinances pro and anti-immigration from 2006-2014, like housing, ordinances on housing, English only, E-Verify, all these ordinances, okay? And also data on the votes of congressional representatives on immigration issue in Congress of the United States, so I can connect the congressman to the congressional district. And we're connecting all this data with the ambition of writing an empirical model of crime, immigration enforcement, and social trust that will allow us to address several issues. First, we want to understand what is the effectiveness of immigration policy in deterring crime, and be able to do counterfactual. And so simulate, for example, the effects of the Trump policy, which are not only detainers, but also President Trump can also not only increase detainers, but can also increase rates, for example. And we want to understand the importance of community trust for the efficiency of law enforcement, and we're also interested on the political dimension and trying to understand what are the determinants of local immigration policy. So this is the plan for today and the future. Thanks for now.
We have 10 minutes for questions.
Awesome.
Comments?
That was a great talk, so thanks first. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what the process for adopting or enrolling in the Secure Communities program is. And,
okay, sure.
So when you talked about, my first question and concern that you already addressed was that potentially there was some selection into that process by Democratic, non-Democratic, but I also wondered if there were potential selection issues by crime rates or by the size of the local immigrant community. So if you could just talk about sort of the process of enrollment, if it was random or if it was sensitive
Sure.
to sort of selection issues.
Yeah, so secure communities was, I wouldn't say it was random, but it was not, it didn't seem it was target to democratic communities, or Republican communities. It was definitely target initially to high immigrant communities. Like they started with like Texas and some of these counties that were high immigrant communities, but I couldn't find it was target to specific political groups. Also, it was a process that was not super like in the news initially, like because it's a kind of a technical thing. While the 287G program was a partnership with ICE, secure communities was more like now the fingerprints are sent to ICE, and this was like a bit subtle, and people started to realize with some time, and it seems that it was more like about it was unclear what was the path of enrollment. If there was, it didn't seem. I had the doubt, so I tried to check whether it was based on democratic counties or not, and I couldn't find any of this, which I think it makes sense. Then you said about the crime. I agree. I didn't talk that much about here. When I was replying to the previous question, I told you to have these two levels of crime. So I have serious crimes and non-serious crimes. So the analysis of enforcement, I replicated only for non-serious crimes, which is where we expect more action, because on the homicides, both San Francisco and Maricopa County will behave the same. The big difference is for like a traffic violation. And I try to look only at non-serious crime where there should be, it should be more comparable, although I don't trust fully their division of serious crime and non-serious crimes. Yeah.
Didn't you try matching misdemeanor?
Not yet. I would do it for, if anything, for the California Trust Act. Because there is like California counties versus California counties, while for my analysis on the Obama guidelines, I have all continuous measures. So it's hard to think where I should consider a treatment group and a control group, while in California it's way more clear. So I welcome your comment on the California Trust Act. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. It was really interesting, and your points for future work sound really exciting as well. I was just wondering, I had some questions about how you defined your variables for democratic and high immigrant share. So with the high immigrant population share, is that just the upper 50 percentile as far as counties go? Because it's just a dichotomous distinction.
Oh, okay, that's the same question.
And then I was also wondering, is that correlated with undocumented? Like, is there evidence that undocumented immigrants live in the same counties where there's high immigrant share, or may there be some discrepancy there?
Okay, to answer. First, I knew it would have been, I thought that graph was helping one with all the groups, and apparently it confused a little bit more. I'm not dividing in high non-citizen share and low non-citizen share. I'm just using the non-citizen share of the population. That graph is just to help clarify what would be a treatment group and a control group, but I'm not making any stand in dividing to above median or below median. No, I'm just using the non-citizen share of the population. So it's a continuous measure. On your second comment, so first of all, I replicate my results with Hispanic non-citizen share. And Hispanic non-citizen share is quite connected with undocumented immigrants. Another thing I did was to use the number of people that file their tax returns with ITIN. those, and I mixed it with like Hispanic non-citizen share, and it was the results still hold.
You mentioned the comparison of trying to look at this California effect comparison of the Democrat or Republican within California, and then the same someplace else.
Now in California, what I did was to mostly look. When I just look at California Trust Act, I look at
so high and low immigrant share versus
high, low, and immigrant share. Yeah.
But it's interesting. You seem to have a story that's part about party affiliation and part about change in policy. So I wonder if you could look within California. It'd be interesting to compare Republican and Democratic counties within California, also to see if there's some sort of latent Republican resistance to this. So officially, all of California underwent the same process. But it'd be interesting to see if there's.
Yeah, I think I did. I did some of this at some point. I don't know. I forgot what I did. yeah, but it's.
It'd be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Additional things to try.
Yeah.
And really quickly, one last question. So you sort of show that Democratic counties were more likely to shift more in their policy behavior? Why not just come up with a variable that measures directly shift in policy behavior? Do you see what I'm saying?
Like, for example,
look at the share of, you could come up with some dichotomous variable or continuous, the share of referrals that lead to, the share of detainers that lead to referrals or whatever the.
Maybe I know what you mean. It's your question could be why I'm not using directly local effect, like I don't regress my outcomes on local enforcement, basically, right? And that's for two reasons. One is endogeneity. So basically, the crime, like an increasing crime, may have an increasing local. An increasing crime may increase police efficiency and so on, immigration enforcement, for example. Increasing crime, okay, now we do more immigration enforcement. That's one reason. Second reason is more technical. It's about a spurious correlation of my measures, which is one denominator is related to one of the numerator of the variables. And that creates nonlinear measurement error, and it's complicated to deal with. Yeah.
In the model with crime rate as an outcome, maybe I missed this, but you cannot tell the difference if it's a crime committed by an immigrant or not.
No, these are uniform crime report data that are only violent property crimes are not divided by.
Do you think you're potentially missing some of the sensitivity if you're targeting, the mechanism that you're really trying to look at is really about crime committed by immigrants or by illegal immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
So are there potentially some compensating effects that you might be missing? You'll be capturing something different if you were able to make this distinction?
It would be, if I were able to have the distinction, I would probably, I would definitely focus on the crimes of undocumented immigrants and see if there is no effect in the crimes of
because in a way I was wondering whether in fact you are interested in just overall crime rate regardless of who's committing this crime in your theory.
In the sense that people are interested on the overall level of crime, right? But in terms of, it would be convincing to see that particularly the crime, the changes in crime is related to those of undocumented immigrants.
One question about the 911 call status. What is the format of this data, or do they come like?
No, this data, we are calling each PSAP, which is like the providers of basically the 911 data centers, the 911 centers, and we ask them to give us the data of the number of 911 calls for every month.
But it's just the number. There is no information.
There is no.
What's the behind the call, because it can vary from having.
No. In some cases, there are some cities that they tell you they have precisely even each microdata. They tell you which call, but in what we are trying to do here is just to collect the number of 911 data and see if there is a change in those variables.
Well, thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you. Thank you.
Alberto, good talk.